So welcome to today's webinar, everyone, on preventing fraud in the recruitment industry. My name is Gemma Rebel. I've worked at Sonovate for a whole year now. It's actually my anniversary today. Prior to that, I spent over 15 years in wealth management, covering compliance, and then specialised in financial crime. For those that don't know much about Sonovate, we're an invoice financing firm. And we helped recruitment agencies to pay their workers. We'll just add two housekeeping points. We are recording today's session, and if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the little questions box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Just pop them in as we go along, and then I'll try to cover as many or all, depending on time, at the end of the session. So just to give you some context, today's session started as an internal training module, and it was received really well and deemed to be very useful. So we decided to develop it for wider industry benefit. So we sort of tweaked it a bit into today's webinar. So on that note, I will get started. So fraud is an ever-evolving crime. It impacts everyone inside and outside of work, and is obviously not just related to the invoice financing industry. However, this stat in particular really does drive home how big a threat it is to our industry. So there were nearly 5,000 instances of invoice fraud in the 2019 to 2020 period, and this totaled over losses of over £81 million. The source of this statistic is UK Finance, and yeah, as I said, it really helps to drive it home, I think. And then another one for you from Action Fraud. Remote access fraud is where access to your smart device or laptop is granted to someone else, usually in a genuine context, for example, from your bank or your work IT department, but is sadly abused by fraudsters to gain access and information that they shouldn't. And there was £50 million lost to this type of fraud in 2021. And I think part of this can be attributed to the pandemic, when more people were working from home, isolating, or just able to use that type of contact with people for fraudsters to abuse it. So how does fraud affect recruitment agencies? There are three main impacts here. Financially is obviously, or I think the most obvious and arguably the biggest. That leads to reputational damage. This can lead to things like bad press or the sharing of process gaps and loopholes. And then strategically is, I guess, the bigger picture. It's a combination of financial and reputational damage, and it really does impact a business's ability to grow and develop. So all three are kind of linked to each other, really. So within our industry, these are historically the types of frauds we might hear about or are common in the market. And today we're going to be focusing on the last two examples, which are client or candidate fraud and umbrella company fraud. Oh, excuse me, sorry, just got to have a sip of water. So starting with candidate impersonation. This is where the candidate either doesn't exist or does exist, but is actively committing fraud via their placement. So some examples of this could be a permanent candidate being placed but not actually showing up, and the recruitment fee still being paid. This could be a temporary worker using stolen or forged ID documents. This could be a genuine contractor, but their hours or rate of pay is inflated. Or this could be a fictitious person that the client has used to generate funds. Some good ways to combat this type of fraud include thoroughly vetting candidates ahead of placing them, phoning their references, and challenging if they don't pass you any, because most people will have a history or someone they can use. So I think never be afraid to challenge something like that where you're not past the information. You can also check online sources such as LinkedIn or social media to get a good idea of if that person exists and if they are who they say they are. And also, dependent on the systems you use, electronic timesheets are a really good idea because they do help to minimise the risk of timesheet manipulation. So moving on to client impersonation. This is where the client either doesn't exist or does exist, but is actively committing fraud using their company as a front. So an example of this would be an agency being passed a list of candidates to put through their books, but none of them exist. So that's the client actively trying to commit fraud. So ways to combat this type of fraud include use of online sources. There's lots of free options there. We've put a list of some of them. So things like Companies House, HMRC, Google Maps, LinkedIn. You can even call the reception of the building that they say they're based in to just double check they're actually there. Ultimately, for us, this is about knowing your business and contacts. Has this approach come out of the blue? Does it sound too good to be true? And can you verify the legitimacy of the business online? If not, then don't be afraid to question it. Verification of invoices and other documentation is key here as well. So if you receive an invoice that you're unsure of, if you call the number from the website rather than what's given on the invoice, even if it is different, that's actually an immediate flag that something could be wrong. So always a good thing to look out for. And yeah, again, just don't be afraid to pick up the phone and verify anything like bank details or invoice references. There's no harm in it, and it, hopefully might save you from having fraud committed against you. So lastly, let's look at umbrella company impersonation, which is similar to the other instances covered, as in they could be a genuine firm trying to scam, or they could just not exist at all. And this one is a really exploitative type of fraud, especially for people who might not have contracted before. So they go to use an umbrella company for ease because they'll sort out the tax and things for them, and then obviously they get defrauded. So it's not a particularly nice one. The key things to note here again are to be wary of anything that sounds too good to be true. So if an umbrella company is promising you that you'll take home 90% of your take-home pay, excuse me, then you know they're not going to be paying the correct rate of tax, because obviously in the UK, 10% is not a UK tax rate. And this isn't a hard and fast rule, but some illegitimate umbrella companies have patterns, such as the quick removal and addition of non-UK based directors, the SIC code on Companies House, which is the code which defines your business activity, might not be related to recruitment. They might, excuse me, they might close after less than a year. This is often done to avoid filing accounts. And if you are targeted by this type of scam or are aware of it, there is a reporting tool on the HMRC website, which we've just added on the slide there for you. So let's move on to the 4 key areas that you can use to help prevent fraud in your business. Firstly, we have kind of mentioned this before, but it's important to be aware and know what looks normal for your agency and your industry. Is this normally how your clients will approach you? Do the credentials of the business check out? Have you got an existing relationship with them? Just all things to be mindful of and to keep track to understand what is normal for your business. The second key area is having escalation points and knowledge around what to do if you do suspect fraud. This will vary depending on the size of your agency, but if you have the resource and scope, it's really good to invest in a subject matter expert within your business, so that if you do have any suspicions, you've got a central point of contact who can escalate and manage that for you. There's loads of great sources online for training in this area. We do have a slide covering some of them later on. And you can also register with anti-fraud authorities such as the National Crime Agency or Action Fraud, where you can log instances of suspicious activity online straight away. And I should mention here that acting quickly is really important. If you do have a suspicion, to report it promptly, as this really can help stop a fraud in its tracks. Thirdly, again, this is dependent on the size of your business, but training is a really important control and preventative measure that can be taken here. I think I mentioned before, but fraud is ever evolving, so keeping on top of the changes and trends that come up can really help you to spot suspicious activity and things that just don't look right. Lastly, and again dependent on the size of your business, is the verification of clients and candidates. It really is vital to know who you're dealing with. So on the next slide, we've got some examples of service providers of KYC checks and some training distributors who I mentioned before. So this preventative measure is slightly more linked to AML regulations and know your customer, the KYC processes. But long-term is a great fraud prevention tool as well, because it gets you off on the right foot, I think, of knowing who you're dealing with. I should mention as well, although there are loads of options for online verification, again, dependent on the size of your business, there's nothing wrong with manual checks if that's what works for your business. For example, if you are physically checking someone's passport, you could look out for real key indicators such as, is it in date? Does it actually look like the person who stood in front of you? And is it damaged? So, for example, when you change passports, they send you your old one back with the corner snipped off. Some people might not know that, so that's a good thing to look out for to make sure the person is using a valid document. And you can also use social media and Google for adverse media searches. That's a particularly helpful and open tool. There's a ridiculous amount of information online. So as I mentioned, on the left-hand side, we've got some course providers specifically related to fraud who you are welcome to contact. And on the right-hand side, we've got some of the ID and verification tool providers. These are really just a small sample of what there is. If you Google it, there are hundreds of options out there. So we've made a little exercise based on some of the things I've mentioned so far. So we'll give you a minute or so, but just make a note to yourselves and see if you can spot any issues with this invoice. I'll give you about a minute or so from now. Okay, I don't have my clock in front of me, thankfully, but hopefully that's long enough. So I'll be really interested to see if you spotted any of these. These are the answers. There were 7 issues with this invoice in total. So the first one is that it's not a leap year. So the date was actually not a real date. The second one was the domain of the name of the contact not reading correctly. So like Microsoft is obviously a huge company. It's very doubtful they would have their email domains looking like that. The third one is a deliberate mix-up between sort of the hours and the pay rate, making it a little bit confusing. The fourth one was the VAT rate being, well, the rate incorrect, but the amount, the rate correct, but the amount incorrect. Then number 5 was the bank details. Obviously, these are faked for this invoice, but you would probably question any bank details that looks like that. Number 6 was the name of the account. It doesn't actually match the client. You would, expect them to tie up at least in some way. And the last one was a slightly sneaky one. So the FSA hasn't actually existed for a good number of years now. They were replaced by the FCA quite a long time ago. So just little things to look out for, really. We hope this will give you some ideas of what to look out for on invoices in the future. So that does actually conclude the content for today. So we hope this has been quite informative for you. But the key things we hope we've driven home are that you remain diligent and aware, and don't be afraid to raise suspicions when things just don't feel right. I personally love this quote from American poet Walt Whitman, because it sums up the nuance of remaining objective when looking at suspicious activity. And feel free to reach out if you would like any further information on fraud prevention, and we will see what we can do for you. I'm just going to stop sharing a second to double check if we have any questions. Oh, we do. We've had a question from Francis West. What percentage of attacks come in via email? Do you mean as in phishing attacks? If you're able to just expand on that a little bit.
No, I think like from email in general, yeah.
Okay. Don't actually have the stats to hand for that, but I can look it up. Phishing is ever changing. I've seen a lot of different variations of it over the years. Some of them quite obvious, some of them not so much actually. But yeah, if you bear with me, I will get you some stats on that, not a problem. Is there any other questions just before I go to our last slide? No, I think we're all good. If anyone does have anything else that they think of, please feel free to just get in touch and we will see what we can do for you. So yeah, that is it for today. We just wanted to say thank you to everyone for attending. We hope it has been useful, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.